Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's episode we are getting back to the basics and doing an oil change on my turbocharged Classic Mini. So stay tuned for that. Alrighty everybody, welcome back to a new episode of Classic Mini DIY. Now, for those of you who have been with the channel for a few years now, you might remember that I did a video on how to change your oil almost 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. And on that episode, I talk about different oils you should use, how to do the job. It was one of my first videos, and it was one of the first ones that really got a lot of views. Now on today's episode, I want to talk about the same concept, but give you guys an updated perspective and to give you guys a few looks into how to change the oil on a kind of a little bit specific and special type of Classic Mini engine. Now before we get started, I do want to mention a couple things. On the merch store, I have launched a ton of new merch. There are new stickers, there are new brake line kits, there is new t-shirts, sweatshirts, flags, all sorts of really cool stuff. And if you guys like these videos, you like the channel, and you feel like it's something that you want to help support, head over to the link in my description, store.classicminidiy.com, and pick up some merch. There's some pretty cool stuff in there, and I think you guys are really going to love it. Now let's talk about oil in the Classic Mini and what kinds of oil you should be using on your car. Now there are a lot of different opinions out there about this kind of stuff, and I also have my own opinions about these things. Now there are a few key factors that you're going to want to think about when putting oil in your Classic Mini. The first thing, and arguably probably the most important thing, is that whatever oil you do decide to use, it has a high zinc content. Now, you don't want to use a high zinc oil and also add a zinc additive. That would be too much zinc. You can actually have too much of that in your oiling system, but you do want a high zinc oil, or get a conventional oil if you don't have something like that available and use a zinc additive. It's either one or the other. Now, one of the most important considerations about the Mini is that the engine and the gearbox share the same oil and share the same compartment. There are a lot of drawbacks to this design, but it is the way it is, and that is the way the A-Series engine was designed. And so, as a result, the Mini takes a little bit thicker oil than most modern cars. And that is because that oil is also being used and lubricating all of the gearing, everything that's inside the gearbox, as well as the upper portion of the engine. Now, the cool thing about the Mini is that you can actually pick up oil filters from your local auto parts store using a few different tricks. If you guys are in the US, these tricks are going to apply directly to you. But if you have a standard Mini, you can actually go into your auto parts store, Advanced Auto, AutoZone, O'Reilly Auto Parts, all of these different places usually share the same database for their oil filters. And the Classic Mini uses the same oil filter as a 93 Dodge Neon. I know it's weird, but if you're in a pinch and you need an oil filter and you can't find one anywhere, that's a little pro tip for you guys to pick up a new one. But most places you're gonna be able to look up the Mini now. You have to go pretty far back, but pre-67 Mini Cooper S, you'll be able to find an oil filter most likely that fits your car. The one I am using in this episode is a Purolator. I'm not sure if that's exactly how that's pronounced, but that's how I say it. A Purolator 1, and it is the model number PL10241. This and all the things I'm using in this episode are linked in my description, so if you want to pick those up, order them from Amazon, order them from anywhere, I get kickbacks for anything that you buy through those links. Now, the oil that I am using in this episode is a Valvoline VR1 racing oil. Now, what makes this a racing oil is that it is a high zinc content oil. But additionally, this oil is targeted towards pushrod engines, which is what the Mini is, and it's made for high RPMs and it can handle getting a little hot. I don't know that it's actually DOT certified, but if you're in the US, it doesn't really matter if you have a Classic Mini. But you know, something to think about, I guess. You might have an issue finding it in other places. And this oil is a 20W50. Now, I have heard of some folks using a 10W40, but I have not used it in my engine yet. I do have plans to give that a shot here in the future, but I had this on hand and I don't want this to go to waste, so this is what's going in the car for right now. Now, there are other brands of oils that, you know, are great for the Classic Mini. And a few of those, if you don't have Valvoline VR1 nearby you or you want to try something different, Miller's is a great oil. It's something they actually sell a kind of like what they market as a Classic Mini specific oil. I don't think it's really anything different than what they normally sell, but it comes in a cool old tin and it has a Mini on it, and you should be seeing that pop up on the side of the screen here. You can also get something called Pen Grade. In my first video about this, it used to be called Brad Penn oil. It was the green oil. The company has changed, shifted. I think they got bought or renamed themselves and became Pen Grade. They have a great oil. I used that for years and years and years. This is just a little bit easier for me to get. And then, of course, there are a slew of other oils. Maybe if you guys have some oils that you really liked in your Mini, felt like it provided you just the right amount of lubrication, gave you good oil pressure, you were happy with it, post those in the comment section below. I'd love to see if there's anything new on the market that maybe I haven't tried yet. Also, while we are replacing the oil on this Mini, we are going to be doing two things. One is capturing some oil for a Blackstone oil analysis kit. This is a clean collection device, and what I'm going to do is capture a little oil as it comes out of the system. And then I'm also going to be replacing my standard sump plug with this super sweet gold sump plug. The magnet is like 6 billion times more strong and more powerful than the one that was in the Mini originally. I got this from 7 Mini Parts, and if you guys want one, I'll have a link to that in the description as well. Now, I think that is probably enough talking about this. Let's get over to the car and get it opened up and change this oil. Now, there are a few things that have changed about this car over the years with the turbo upgrade that I did, but some things haven't changed, and one of those is that I am still wearing my safety sandals while doing these jobs. Just kidding. If you're doing a big job, wear real shoes. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, Cole, you have a front mount intercooler in here so that the turbo can fit and get cooled properly. Where is your oil filter and where's your distributor? Where's all that stuff? Well, I don't have a distributor anymore. I have an electronic ignition, and my oil filter has actually been relocated into the fender inside the wheel well. So if you are doing this on a standard car, your oil filter would be right down underneath my finger here, and it would be a simple twist off. In my experience, the easiest way to do that is to take the grill off the front here, and then you'll have direct access to loosen that up. Now, in my case, I'll show you guys where mine's located to give you guys an idea of how it's different with a turbo engine. Now, the first thing I recommend when doing a job like this is obviously to lift the car up. You're going to want to be able to reach your sump plug, which is right down underneath the engine on the left side of your gearbox. This is usually pretty accessible, even with the car down on the ground, but this way you guys can see a little bit better. All right, so now is time for the first of the kind of unusual steps that we're going to have to take on this oil change, and that is removing the driver's side wheel, the right-hand side wheel, because my oil filter's right up underneath there. All right, so this next part is where things start to get a little messy, and this is where you're gonna wanna put some gloves on. Now, we're gonna take this sump plug out. When you jack it up from that side, it actually puts a slight angle on the engine and helps angle the oil pouring and out of your engine here so it falls, as much of that oil gets out as possible. And then obviously we can fill it up with as much clean new oil as we can. And if you guys are doing an oil test on your engine and you want to see an analysis of the oil that is coming out, this is where you're going to want to capture that oil as it starts to come out of your engine. There we go. And now that oil is looking pretty much like oil. Nothing wild and crazy, doesn't look too bad. And we can take a look at the sump plug here, and there's not really any debris on there. I mean, there's a little bit of little shavings and stuff, but that's not too bad. And the engine has been running for about 1,000 miles at this point. I'm changing the oil relatively soon and relatively early because this engine oil is the oil that was in when I was breaking the engine in after the whole turbo build was put back together. So now we let that drain, and while we do that, let's go ahead and take the oil filter off. All right, and so now you can see, got a good look up here. This is the oil filter, obviously, and it is on a remote relocation bracket that I got from HEL Performance. I actually sell these on my store, so if this is something that you're interested in, you can pick one of those up on my merch store. But we're gonna take this filter off, and now it's got a rubber cover on it to prevent it from road debris. Let's see if I can do this by hand. I don't remember how tight I put this on here. Now, as you can imagine, because this is sitting up over the brake assembly and everything, it's super important that you don't let any oil drip down in this situation. But if you don't have one up here, you're probably going to be fine. Just something to keep in mind if you are considering putting something in like this in your car. All right, so now that we have this off of the car, let's talk about a few of the things we're changing and also a few tips and tricks for you for those of you who this may be the first time that you're changing your oil. Now, this is the old filter, and on Amazon, I picked up a few sets of neodymium magnets. This is a really strong magnet, and I normally just place this on the bottom of the filter. Usually I centralize it on the bottom of the filter. And I do that to actually capture as much of the actual ferrous metals that I can inside the filter to help assist with the removal of as much of the material that would get caught on this magnet before it makes it down into the gearbox. So if anything is getting up in the filter and the filter isn't doing a great job of, capturing that material, I add this magnet right on the bottom, and this goes from filter to filter to filter to filter. So this stays with me. This obviously goes in the trash. And now let's just take a look at this. This doesn't have a ton of stuff on it, which is great. Especially after 1,000 miles and breaking the engine in, that's not too bad. Pretty good about that. Now this is the old sump plug. That I'm gonna keep as a spare, but now I'm moving on to this gold plated one. Now how beautiful is that? So you might say to yourself, Cole, gold is not magnetized. And yes, you'd be right. The way I understand it is this gold has also a neodymium magnet inside it, and I think it's gold plated. I'm not sure what the benefit of that gold plating is, but it's a much stronger magnet. You can see here, can move the filter there with the magnet. Whoop, there we go, got caught. Now this one, barely even, I'm like right up next to it, and I mean barely has any magnetized. So that is going to help, and all of these things combined really do a great job of helping to filter out as much of that swarf as possible, because the Mini with the shared gearbox does generate a lot more metal shavings than a modern car would. So we've got our new filter here, and it's the same model. Same shape, same size, everything's the same. But what we're going to be doing is installing the magnet on this filter. Boom, installed. And now we are going to put our sump plug back in. We're going to pre-fill this. In fact, we'll go ahead and do that right now. There's a lot of mixed opinions about this. I always pre-fill the oil filter, especially on my car. I have, with those additional oil lines, it takes a little bit longer for all that oil to get up and into the filter. So by pre-filling it like this, I prevent any sort of excessive wear and excessive non-oil situation in the car, as it's starting up and as it's cranking over. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this in, and then we'll do the little oil trick where we put it on the lip here. Go ahead and do that right now. Now the other thing we do on this engine that we don't do on other ones is add this little rubber protection around the filter. And you might wonder what this is for. And the purpose of this rubber protection around this filter is to prevent road debris from puncturing the filter and keeping it from, getting damaged. And of course, if it got damaged while the car was running and oil was moving through here, you could have a situation where you have a complete loss of oil pressure, which means a full engine rebuild. It's a surprisingly effective way to prevent punctures in these things. It works really well, apparently. Now, another tip for you guys that you might not be doing on your Minis already, and that's using thread sealant on this thread. What I've found is over the years, these gearbox casings aren't always super tight, the thread tolerance on these in comparison to the oil plugs. And so there are two things that you need to do when you replace this. One is to replace the flat washer that goes underneath here. If you're using the stock plug, then you are going to have a copper washer. If you're using this gold one, it comes with a crush washer made for it. And I think it's just made out of like some sort of squishy metal. And what I normally do now is I actually apply a oil and fuel safe thread sealant. And the reason I do this is just to add a little bit of security. You don't have to add a lot, but the stuff that I've been using recently is True Blue, but I'll put a link to this in the description as well. It's got PTFE in it. It is actually fuel safe as well. Not that there should be too much fuel in your oil. If you got fuel in your oil, obviously, probably want to be concerned about that. Now, something to keep in mind is that sump plug does not need to be just the tightest thing on the planet. This just needs to be snugged up. It needs to be just enough to crush that washer a little bit. You don't want to over tighten this because aluminum is a soft metal and you don't want to strip these threads because it is a pain in the butt to fix that. Like, just the worst. And once that's done, we've got to put the filter back on. I'm going to go ahead and screw that back on, and then I'll meet you at the top of the engine where we're going to actually fill it up with the new oil. Now the next part of this job is probably the easiest part of the job, and that is filling up the oil until your oil is full. It's pretty straightforward. As I say it out loud, it's pretty easy. If you're curious, this cap is from DSN, Retro Classics. Gonna go ahead and set that off to the side. Now for today's episode, we are going to be using my super cool Oil Filler 3000 here. This is simply an old oil filter cap modified so that it holds the filter upright while you're pouring that oil in here. Now, it's pretty easy to make yourself. Just get a funnel, cut a hole in an old oil filler cap, and then boom, you got an Oil Filler 3000. Now, depending on your Mini, you will take about 5 to 5.5 quarts. If you have a larger oil system like me or an oil cooler, something of that nature, you may take closer to 6 or possibly even more oil. The key to filling it with the correct amount of oil is to check the level frequently. We're gonna go ahead and pour this oil in here and start to let that suck down into the engine here. All right, and so with that, you have successfully filled up the oil in your car, and if you're like me, you got oil on some parts that you don't want oil on. Now, all you gotta do, replace that cap, check the oil level, make sure it's full, and then verify oil pressure by cranking the engine without the ignition on. That'll allow you to check your oil pressure, and then you should be ready to hit the road. Okay, so that is gonna wrap up this episode of Back to the Basics on Classic Mini DIY. It's a pretty straightforward job, changing the oil in your car, but it is one of the most important things you can do on a Classic Mini. Now, I normally change my oil on this engine. Well, obviously, I just changed it at 1,000 miles, but my plan moving forward is about every 1,500 to 2,000 miles, I will be changing my oil on my car. This can vary depending on the type of engine you have, your level of risk tolerance. You might change it more frequently than that. But in addition to the amount of miles that are on the car, the age of the oil matters as well. So if your oil has been sitting in the car for a long, long time, it's probably time to change it. It's usually not a very expensive job, 30 to 40 bucks for the amount of oil that you need in the car, plus the filter, and your engine is going to thank you for it, and the car is going to run a lot better. Now, if you guys have any questions about the things that I did in this video, any of the special parts about this turbo build, feel free to post those questions in the comment section below, and I will do my best to answer those for you guys. And just a reminder, if you guys want to support the channel and support more videos like this, head over to my merch store, check out all the really cool new stuff there, like this Classic Mini DIY flag that is behind me right now. But that is going to wrap up this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and you guys know the drill. Until I see you on the next one, enjoy those minis and motor on.